What job should marketing get done in a company?
For me, marketing is trust building through storytelling and whatever other avenues that you choose to market through in any of those ways. I come from a background of nonprofit. So I feel like there can be the basis is the same, but I actually think that there's different approaches that you might have, whether you're a nonprofit or a for profit company, in just understanding like what the goal of marketing is. What I do, and especially in the work that I do, which is as a collective impact organization communications person, where what we're doing is really garnering trust. For me, that is what marketing is. It's understanding who the market, like target market person is, the single person, who that is, and then being able to communicate to them to be able to give them the information they need to be able to connect with us as an organization and then continuously build the trust with that person as then can be replicated across that entire market demographic. So for me, marketing is trust building through storytelling and whatever other avenues that you choose to market through in any of those ways.
What can a graphic designer turned nonprofit marketer teach us about marketing? Quite a lot. Kaelyn shares so much practical marketing wisdom throughout the rest of this episode. Two main ideas you're about to hear. One, why you need to be clear on who you're trying to reach in message. And two, a metaphor of road design and communication and how to use that to improve your marketing. So, who is Kaelyn? First, she's a friend, an amazing human. We're both from Green Bay, Wisconsin. You see the jersey. And we regularly get coffee, talk about marketing and life. She started her career, as mentioned, as a graphic designer, one of those companies being the Girl Scouts of Northwestern Great Lakes, ending her time there as a communication partnerships coordinator. She now works with Achieve Brown County as a communications manager. Before we dive into the conversation, start the intro. Welcome to Season 3 of On Marketing, a show where we explore what marketing is, like really is. I won't tell you what to think. I'll help you improve how you think about marketing. It's August 30th, 2024. I'm Jordan Ogren, a marketing strategist by day and a podcast host by night. Before we get in, all opinions shared in this podcast are the individual views of the hosts and guests, not those of their employers or associated organizations. This content is intended for informational purposes and should not be considered professional marketing guidance. Listeners should act on the information provided at their own risk. Thank you for being here. To your caveat, I think that probably goes to both. So maybe what is your
True.
difference thought on the nonprofit for profit? I would be very interested on hearing that.
As a nonprofit, we are still selling something. You know, as a for-profit company, you have a product. Our product can still lie with getting funders and fundraising, but we really ask for time versus for you to purchase something. For me, I'm marketing to future potential volunteers. I'm marketing to our next board member. I'm marketing towards someone that might benefit eventually from the service we can provide because they don't know it exists. So even though the basis of a lot of what we do as marketers, whether it's for profit, nonprofit, however you want to look at it, what your marketing is different. And so how you go about that, I think can change a lot, knowing that I'm asking for your time, which can be a lot harder of a sell in some ways versus asking for someone to purchase a product, which you can see the direct benefit of exchange of goods and services. So, what can I share with you and teach you and show you as a nonprofit by you giving us the time that you cannot get back to help further the cause that we have?
And I think your point is so valid that, especially with nonprofit, there's a lot of people who will write a check. That's not hard,
Mhm.
or it's not easy because you need to have the money, but it's a
Right.
lot easier than saying I'm going to go dedicate 8 hours today to this soup kitchen. And I think there's a really interesting piece you point out there that the trust almost needs to be more to get someone to do that and to do it repeatedly and to really give into the cause. But which was an interesting thought is like you have more audiences, quote unquote, to like market
Yes.
to. But back in your first answer, though, it was like one audience. So how do you think about that? Do you layer them, or is it just like they're all on the same level and we're just having different, slightly different messaging for each of them or marketing?
Yeah, it's definitely layered. So I'm a one of one. I am the only person in my, I'm a generalist in a lot of that because you have to know a lot of things. That's not to say that I don't have supports in a lot of way. We have volunteers that can help out with different things. I have resources with people that are wonderful and willing to step in when it's something that's specialized. But being a one of one, I have to know who's the one person that is, if at the end of the day, this is the person we're talking to, we have to make sure that this is who we're talking to. But then with our, marketing plan and our communication plan, right? Like your integrated plans, you can do that in multiple ways or look at different demographics and be able to have the same core message of, hey, we want you to volunteer your time. We want you to sign up for this. We want you to benefit from this. Okay, who are the three people then we want to make sure that we're saying this to? And then we can tweak the messaging of what that is to them differently. But it's a lot. I mean, it's a lot of work when you are trying to get support financially in one, and then you're trying to market out for someone to benefit from something. But then you also have people in the middle that you want to be a part of, like what you do. Like if I want someone to be a part of a Marcom team with me, how am I marketing to them? And I think when we look at like the broad basis of the platforms we use, we don't do stuff that's that specific, but everything is Marcoms. It doesn't matter if like this is Marcom, like this is us talking and being able to share about something I'm passionate about. And in that way, like what's the ROI on that? Like how are we talking about it? What's the messaging? What's the base of that? And how are we doing that well repeatedly over and over again so that they're, even if you're talking to someone differently, if they follow it back, it's still the core of you, your organization, the message you're trying to share, whatever it is.
A thought or something that
Yeah.
I've been told as an answer to what is marketing is kind of drilled down to this, just the clearest point of like marketing is to drive revenue, because if marketing and obviously for profit, if it's not driving revenue, then what is the investment? And somebody pushed back that said, okay, well, that's not true in nonprofit. And then I had to take a step back and I'm like, but at the end of the day, if your marketing isn't getting someone to either give money, give time, then like it's not working. How do you, as someone in nonprofit, wrestle with that thought of like if someone was to tell you marketing's job is to drive revenue no matter whatever the organization is? How do you respond to that? And you can definitely disagree or kind of take it in a nuanced way, but what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's nuanced because I think you can say revenue and you can, I think that that word can still work for the things we're asking for. I mean, but versus it being financial, like revenue, it's time, which I think is time is still like a treasure that you are giving. So I think if you broaden that word a little bit, yes, I think that's what it is. And I think at the end of the day in nonprofit, sometimes that's a hard thing to talk about. Creating a business out of a mission, which is what you have to do when you have a nonprofit. It's still a business. You still have to keep the lights on and the doors open to be able to do what you want to do and make the changes that you want to see in the world and be able to give people the thing that you're creating with your group. Yes. So I would agree with that with like a little asterisk at the end, opening up what that term can mean.
Before this turns into a completely non-profit marketing show, which I really am
Yes.
fascinated.
Yeah.
I think there's so many unique insights that can be applied kind of in both spectra or both areas. And now I'm kind of in both of those too. So I see it. But maybe a question that I want to ask you is, especially too, kind of as you've prefaced before the call of kind of your background not being totally in marketing, comms, all of this stuff, being more of a graphic designer, what have you changed your mind on in maybe 1, 2, 3 years? So maybe when you started, you believed X, but today you believe Y or just slightly different.
My background, I went to school for graphic design. That's what I have my bachelor's degree in. Went into the workforce, working your way into, but really with a graphic design mindset, being a specialist in that. And then going into nonprofit, you kind of got to know a little bit about everything. It's kind of all hands on deck all the time. And so I was able to pick up and learn a lot of things from working in an environment like that and having to be really strategic. I think that was the thing that I slowly learned and developed as I took more and more steps from specialized branding and design in that way, moving into the marketing and communication strategies you have to build, the integration of all of those things together. And so I don't think it was necessarily a realization of, oh, you have to think about it before you do the thing. I knew that going into it, but just recognizing how much of that really, that's where the biggest amount of your time is spent is in that strategy, and then the execution is pretty like it's quick. And once you have that strategy done and down and that plan ready and put together, being able to go off into your specialized areas or being able to ask people for help on things, you can get so many things done so quickly when you have a really good plan put in place.
I love that. I love that a lot because there's that story. If I have 5 minutes to cut down a tree, I'll spend 4 minutes and 30 seconds sharpening my blade. I kind of relate that to the strategy where if you just keep doing tactics without really, like, you're just banging a dull blade against a tree, and eventually brute force could bring it down, but it's not going to be a clean cut. You're going to have other trees that didn't get cut down because you spent too much time on this one. And I do think to that point, but I think the key in strategy, and maybe this is something you've is like subtraction, because as you're talking about all the audiences, it's like you have to have a number one audience, which means that there can't be five number ones. There has to be a one and then a two. So it's almost like trade-offs of making hard decisions. And that's why maybe some people don't dip into strategy, because it's just like, I don't want to make that decision consciously or subconsciously. I just want to market to everybody. How do you deal with like the trade-offs of having to be more like strategy focuses you or makes you say no to more things? Or have you maybe found different in strategy?
For me, it is about finding the core of your why and your who and all of that, right? Identifying that one, identifying that single person. Maybe they have a name, maybe you know where they work or what they do, maybe you know their background, right? Like you can be able to really identify down and then be able to build for them. And then there's always caveats. There's always something that really matters to either an individual staff member or maybe a part of the bigger, maybe there's something else happening that just still needs to happen, even if it doesn't necessarily perfectly fold into the beautiful plan you put together. And that's okay. Like, that's okay to spend a little bit of time on this thing that maybe isn't a part of the perfect puzzle you've put together. And that's okay too. But I do think that having something to fall back on, at least you even know, hey, this doesn't fit into the plan, but I'm saying yes to it because I have the time to do it and I know that this really matters to someone else. For me, it's the knowledge that I have, the knowledge that I can be able to impart, and then the being able to explain it to people so that they can grasp that this thing that we're doing, why it doesn't fit, but why we're still saying yes to it anyways.
Because it becomes less of you versus them, your idea versus their idea, and we have a plan that we're kind of reverting back to, that which doesn't mean we can't do something, but as you're talking, you're communicating like, this doesn't fit, but we're going to do it. But here's a plan that's kind of an objective being almost. It's like I like to talk about like a shared truth or like a source of truth, where it's like, no, you said on this date this. Like, it's no arguing that. It's not my word versus your word. And I think a plan or a strategy is helpful, because if we can all agree to said strategy, then we're not like, I'm not saying no to you. The strategy is essentially saying no to you, which becomes a less like personal thing. But some people probably still struggle to grasp that, and they could still make it personal. But I think it helps not make so much personal in marketing.
Yeah, and I think too it also I think it also helps people understand that by saying yes to this, we might be saying no to something else. And if we're saying no to that other thing that might have this bigger impact, if this thing really matters more than this, then that's okay. But we don't have infinite hours in the day to continue to create and plan and strategize. Are we okay with this trade-off? And if yes, then let's run with it. So I would rather spend my time again building trust and building trust even with the people that work for me, that trust isn't just the external group, that's the internal, that's everyone that is connected to us. So if that helps to build that trust to show I see the importance of what you want done, that to me is more important than holding on to this other thing so tightly that we again lose sight of that trust building of what's happening within our organization.
A beautiful way to tie it both to your point externally, but even internal, which is like a whole conversation of internal marketing, probably in
Yeah.
bigger companies, like getting
Yeah.
people behind, like, why are we doing blogs? Why are we doing these things that I never thought was important? But now I'm just seeing over and over again that, like, if you don't have the trust internally, like, it's harder to
Mhm.
build the trust externally, but it's probably not a perfect dichotomy that way. But I really like how you touched on that internal piece too, that we need to build trust with the people we work with every day to do better.
You're not going to have great content if the people that have the content within your organization are too scared to tell you or don't think that they matter. I would much rather have people bring a billion ideas to me throughout the day and be able to sift through all of them and say, like, these are the nuggets that we're going to take, than be like, hey, why didn't you tell me about this thing? And have them feel like that I don't care or that what they're going to tell me doesn't matter, because again, there's stories like I am the megaphone. I don't really get to go out and do the cool things that we do in our organization, and I don't really get to feel the impact of it. Everyone that I work with does. So, how do I build that to be able to then articulate it externally or louder or share that or show how it like connects back? So, and now we're talking more about organizational, trust and development and all that stuff, but that is a big part of what I think makes nonprofit work. So being able to have that, being able to tell the story, because the story is the people, build that trust, you're going to have so much better outputs in what you're creating and what you're communicating and what you're marketing to your external audiences when you have that internally.
I think we're ready to jump into the main content. I mean, you've already given so much here, so I'm grateful for it. But you have this super fascinating idea. I remember we were sitting, Carvana, just a coffee shop. If you're not, we're both in Green Bay. This was a cool. I started season 3 with someone from Green Bay, and we're going to end it. But regardless, we're at a coffee shop, and you started to tell me this kind of like how you see transportation infrastructure being kind of a metaphor or a way to think about communication and Marcom plans, and all that. So I want to just give you the floor. I'll have millions of questions, but I just want you to share a bit of this analogy, this metaphor, maybe even where it first came to you and then kind of what it is. And you have a lot of pieces to it tying to different things in infrastructure, which I found to be super insightful.
Absolutely, yeah. As I said before, my background is not in it is not in marketing or communications. I'm a graphic designer. And then in a lot of the spaces that I've worked in, I have not worked with other marketers. I've been a lot of the time teams one of one or working with other people that are specialties, but not necessarily in the strategy and communication. When I talk with people, it cannot be lingo. It cannot be like we don't have the same point of reference for why things are important. So I have turned to a lot of metaphors. I use a lot of metaphors in explaining what I do inside work and outside work. And one of the things that I have found that really works to communicate well is comparing marketing and communications to transportation infrastructure, highways, intersections, all of these sorts of things. I mean, we even talk about like when we're creating like roadmaps of projects or, whatnot, we already kind of use this in everyday communication. And so I found that this ended up being a really easy way for people to visually understand why is this thing existing and to be able to walk people back on the basics of stuff. So one of the ones I think I had talked about originally with you was roundabouts. I outside of all of this, I love infrastructure. I love transportation infrastructure. I think it's so wildly interesting to think about like how our roadways have developed and how we're able to get from here to here and now these like fairly easy and simplistic ways and people just have this natural understanding of how to use them now too. And so that to me is just really interesting and that's a whole nother podcast that maybe we can talk about another time. But I I found that, like I said, I found this is a really easy way to communicate this back. So some of the things that I'll reference is like if I'm talking with someone and they're getting too in the weeds or they're really like they're trying to give too much information in the sense that they're trying to be transparent but really they're just saying too much and people aren't able to follow through. I talk about you're creating too many signs on the side of the road and no one can read any of them. Like you have 6 seconds digitally or like 15 seconds verbally or in real life to be able to articulate a message. You have too many signs. No one's reading any of them. You're driving down the road at 70 miles per hour. You look, you don't see anything. You just see chaos on the side of the road. So that's one thing that I'll talk about with people to try to pull them back and to try to streamline what their true message, like at the end of the day, what do you need people to know? Another one is roundabouts. So I use this as a metaphor for someone that's interacting with a product or a organization or a thought that they've never interacted with before. They get probably generally what you do in the same way that you've gone up to an intersection while you're driving. You know what an intersection is, but a roundabout is very scary for a lot of people. You generally get the idea that you need to yield and you need to stick to the right. But other than that, you're not taking in everything else that's happening around you. You're not seeing the bikers that are like trying to cross the street or the beautiful like flowers that are in the middle of the road. You're not seeing any of that. You're just like hoping that God will help you get through this intersection and that you won't hit anyone. So, how do we understand our audience when they've never interacted with us before? They don't know what's happening. How do we help them get through the roundabout safely and not feel like they never want to go through one again? How do we do that? So that's one that I use. Also talking about like the different kinds of roads you drive down need to be treated differently in the same way that the different platforms that we utilize, whether that's social media or digital or whatever it is, have to be treated differently. The way that we look at a country road is going to be very different than the way we look at an interstate. Yes, they both get you from point A to point B, but they're different and we have to treat them differently. And then the last one that I tend to go towards too is that fixing the potholes are more important than creating a landscape on the side of the road. So if you're not like building a really strong infrastructure, no one cares that you planted pretty flowers. People just care that they keep hitting potholes. No one like no one's gonna like this really cool branding that you did if they still have questions about the basis of your organization. If they don't know what you do, they don't care about the rest of it. So how do we bring it back to making sure we have the strongest infrastructure, the smoothest roads? And then how do we build the landscaping on the side to make their experience even better? That was a lot, but those are some of the big ones that I tend to go to that are like normal pitfalls that you have when you're talking with someone that isn't in a Marcom field and is just trying to be genuinely helpful, but it doesn't work in the platforms in which we know are those avenues that you need to go down with people.
I love how you keep using avenues in words like that. That's so funny.
Bring it
But
back.
it makes so much sense because as you opened it, I think metaphors are obviously great at getting someone who doesn't grasp or just doesn't have that to kind of be like, oh, that makes sense. If I'm going 70 miles per hour, having a sign every 10 yards won't do anything for me. And it's to the point, it's just too much information. And I think like a piece of it, maybe there's two pieces. One I see is there's a finding of the core, which you've mentioned, finding of that. What is a sign that we need? If we're only going to have one sign, what is that? Is it a speed sign? Is it, or are we the Autobahn? And we don't really care about that, but we want to have like, here's the next place to get off because that's what we're more focused on. We want people to go as fast as they want. So I find that to be, it's kind of like a refining. So just using this metaphor helps me refine my thoughts if there's a thing I'm trying to share. And then as you talked about potholes in landscaping, which I found a incredible dichotomy of which do we focus on. And really that breaks down to the higher aims. Sure, landscaping may feel cool, it may look cool, and it may feel great when you're done. But in my opinion, that's a lower aim to the road than the potholes. That is a higher aim because, again, going to my first question, like what is the job of a road? It's not to give me pleasure. It's not to make me feel great. It's to get me to where I'm going, and a pothole is impeding that process, not the landscaping, not the cool banner above my head, but like the thing in the road. So then you are able to understand, oh, what is a higher aim for this campaign? What's a higher aim for that? What are your thoughts on like those two things? Do you see those outcomes happen? I think you shared that does help people kind of sharpen or focus their thoughts, but what are some of the outcomes when you share pieces of this metaphor with someone when you're working on a Marcom activity?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really helpful because I do think even in the last one, right, with the potholes and the landscaping, people want the landscaping to exist because it's pretty and it looks cool and like, wow, this is great. And like how much of a feather in our cap it is to have this like beautiful thing that we're doing. And when, when you're talking about it realistically in marketing and communications, like you're talking about having beautiful branding. You're talking about having these things that are like, being on all the socials and making sure that you're keeping up with these things. And like those are all really great to have when you have a really strong brand position, when you have a really strong understanding of what the goal is. And I think for a lot of people, when they're scrolling on social media, they don't see any of that. They only see this because they don't recognize that so much of that has to go into it. And so I think it does really help people take a step back and recognize that marketing and communications is not just the shiny stuff. There was a guest that you had on here before that was talking about like it's the sweet treats and it's the chocolate, like that's the fun part of it, but there's so much that goes into building and making that candy and the wrapper and putting it in the store in the right spot and having it on the end cap and doing all of that before that chocolate gets into your hands. So I do think that it helps people take a step back and understand the strategy behind something. That strategy doesn't really get seen normally.
Which I think we touched on this when we were first talking about this concept of like someone planned that road. Like there's just these plots of land, and then at some point someone planned it, and then as life or time goes on, we replan roads, we create interstates. And one thing I'm fascinated is that Route 66, I think, is like a really, really clear example of that. That when things change, when infrastructure or transportation does not go through your town anymore, you lose. Like, it's very hard to compete. And you see this everywhere. So, like, as you were talking, I'm trying to listen, so I didn't want to do too much like kicking around of this idea,
Sure.
but like, so maybe you can help me. Like, is that like emphasizing the importance of strategy, that once you set it, like you need to really spend time to like plan the roads, or you need to be open to revisions? How do you think about maybe that piece of that infrastructure? We don't even realize like that someone planned this so I can get here to here quicker or avoid whatever. How do you think about like the initial? So you talked a lot about things that are already there, roads, signs, potholes, but what about before anything's even there, when we're plotting new city, new transportation like system?
Yeah, I mean, if you really want to keep like the metaphor going, you got a blank empty land. I think these things are already, they're not physically there, but you can pick and choose from them to build the city. Right, be a city planner then, right? Maybe you do need an interstate running through the middle of your city because that, for whatever reason, is like the thing you need. That these things exist. That there are, like public relations is a great way for your, organization to be able to talk one on one and be able to express with a human face who you are. You can talk about like digital, having a digital space, whether that's any socials or a website or whatever that looks like. You can have your physical print things. These things already exist and we can pick and choose from them. So I think it's understanding again, what do you want your city to look like? What do you want your organization to look like? Who are we serving in your city or in your organization? And then using the tools that exist to be able to create a great city. And then there are going to be things that you recognize that need to get built up or pulled back because they're not servicing the people in the way that they need to. So I mean, I think we can kind of leave that like idea behind, but I think, there are ways that you can build something and then continuously grow on it when you're recognizing that it's working or that you need to do better in a space. In the same way, I think you can pull back because it's bad to have something that doesn't work well than just not having it at all. Like it's better to just let it go if it's not doing the thing you need it to do and maybe come back to it later.
I love that. As you were talking there, I thought about like cities that are by water and cities that aren't, and how maybe those roadways are different. And to your point too, of like, rarely will you ever have, just going back maybe 100 or however many years, there were settlements, there were groups. So it's almost like a good marketer in my mind acts like a city planner in the sense that they're able to survey. Like we have a really strong website, we have really great, so like building the roads in a way of aligning around that, or realizing, hey, our town center's here, it's really big, but we know in 10, 15 years, we're going to want to move it closer to the water. We're projecting this. So then you kind of say, we're going to bet on a podcast because we have a super vocal CEO or somebody. Like that for me was so interesting, because it's like, if you don't survey the land, you'll just build a road wherever you want, not really realizing or talking to locals to be like, oh, nobody likes going to this place, even though it looks like it's busy. That's great to know. We won't build a road, or we'll use a lesser road, choosing kind of using the different types of roads as like PR and all these different channels. I love it. And I could stay here forever. So I'm going to pull me more or
Yeah.
less away from this. But and you talked about this a lot on how you came from design. So as a marketer who can design, or maybe a designer who can market, what do you see marketers that are just pure marketers, and there's obviously no pure blood, muggle, whatever, but what do they not see that you see as someone who came from design to marketing, versus me having to marry someone in design because I just can't understand it? Like what could you teach me, or what have you seen, or insights that would be great for other pure marketers to kind of know from designers?
Yeah, I think it's one of those, like, I don't feel like I fully fit in a design space anymore, and I don't feel like I fully fit in a marketer space. So, going to, some of those like meetups and all of those things, like I don't speak the language of either anymore, because you have to do so much that the specializing of something, you lose that. And I think there's benefits to that. I think that there's also downfalls to that. I think the benefits are that I would say that I have a little bit more of a target market viewpoint of marketing than maybe someone that is super deep in marketing would have, because I don't have that learned experience versus lived experience. Like just kind of as you were saying, like prefacing my understanding of things. But I had written a couple of things down as well of like, if you can't sell your organization in 15 seconds, there's nothing that you can build that your ROI is actually going to like benefit from. I If you don't understand who you are and you can't break it down to the most basic form of who you are and what you're selling or what you're doing or what your organization is, you don't actually understand like who you are. And so I think that that's really important to remember, is that you can get in the weeds on all the technical, you can understand all the avenues of doing things, but if you're the strategy person and you're looking at the bigger picture of it and you can't do that, there's nothing you can do that's gonna make your selling point good. It's just not. And then I also think that we should also really be considering the idea that we are actually more teachers than we are creators in some ways, that everyone that's a part of our organization should have the ability to be a marketer or a communicator, and that a lot of what I do is just training people to do it better and well. So passing off asking someone to do a blog post for me, I need to train them to be able to do that well. And then that actually takes something off of my plate to be able to create that content. So, how are we training people to be communicators and marketers on our behalf? And how do we just hold firm to that strategy piece that we've created and then be able to bring people into the fold of doing that?
That's interesting how you note the not feeling like you belong to either of the. So I think that's interesting. I just think there's a pro. I've interviewed a developer, a few others on this pod, and it's just the way that they think. To your point, they don't think in the conventional terms. They don't think in the mental models that have been essentially, to your point, learned, given to them. They live it. They see how do they buy? Because one thing I find in marketing, and maybe you don't, but we have this illusion that like what I'm going to do in marketing, I would never buy that, but someone else will. It's just so bizarre to me. It's like I'll run a display ad that I skip past every time and I laugh at, but I'll do that for our company because it's different. Like it's just this illusion where if you're not bred up, if you aren't born in marketing, you're able to, I think sometimes just, again, it's just so much like just being real. Like, is this like, does it, to your point, like if you can't say in 15 seconds, it's just, you bring more of a pragmatic, sometimes some people do when they don't grow up in marketing. I kind of am like, in between, to your point, I'm in between that because I obviously went to school for different things, but business administration, which is kind of marketing, but like most marketers I don't align with because they still have these very archaic views of like, yeah, we need to use social to sell our product. And I'm like, have you ever bought a product from a company who just said, hey, we sell said products? No, it was a Savannah Bananas cool video. And then you're like, what do they do? Oh, they sell clothes for baseball players. I have a son who plays great. And it's like, so I feel similar where it's like I don't fit in traditional marketers. And then there's this like subset of like hardcore new age marketers that I also like disagree with some of their principles. So I feel you in this kind of like, I have nowhere to put my base, but that's actually, I find an advantage because then I can kind of learn and take so many things, gain so many things from others that maybe I wouldn't if I just stuck to my proverbial tribe or group of people who think similarly. So I was excited that I had you on here.
Oh yeah. Well, thank you. I'm happy to be here. But I think that that's so true though. I feel like, and it's not saying that if you started in marketing or still in marketing, like you are probably very good at what you do and you are very specialized in it. But I think there is something to be said about having like a well-rounded understanding of different things. Like if you have a background in philosophy, you can bring some of that to the table in the why and understanding the target market. If you have a background in all of these other spaces, whether that's something that could be considered creative or not. I mean, the more holistic you become and the more well-rounded you are, the more you bring to the table in different viewpoints of it as well too. So there's no wrong way to approach being a professional in this space. I think as long as you're curious enough to continue learning, I think that you can end up to where you want to go. But you just like you got to be curious enough, I think.
You're such a sweet person, Kaelyn. I love how you ended that, right? That there is both. I'm kind of that
True.
person who takes a hard side sometimes. I really like that, bringing us back together because it is so
Yeah.
true what you just said. And I think there's even this like longer conversation that I've had with a few marketers on specialization versus kind of generalization. I've read a book called Range. generalist Trump, or like like he's essentially making the claim that generalist Trump specialists in a kind of generalized world, or whichever. And I think I so agree with it. I read a book too on investing that really talked about like it was like a liberal arts kind of introduction to investing. So you learn biology and what lessons can we take from evolution and all these things that do apply to investing, compounding, all these things. And I find that to be over. I don't make the claim that you have to be a generalist, but it just keeps being reinforced that the best marketers have an ability to take a generalist approach. I don't only have a knife, I have a knife, I have a saw, I have a hammer, I have all of these things very generalized. So whatever we need for said client or in our own company for the challenge or problem we're trying to overcome, I don't know which is better, but I think approaching marketing in a generalist frame is a good way to do good marketing. Where if you're only SEO, and another point is AI, I think can replace the specialist more than it can replace a generalist, because a generalist would be AIG or artificial intelligence, which is like a human but a robot. I don't think it's there, but man, ask it to like optimize this web page for SEO, metadata, all that stuff. It will do that way quicker, way better than I could ever do. So it's starting, in my opinion, to make the generalized marketer more powerful, because then they can with AI be specialized in all of these realms that would have took full dedication and in certifications and things to get to, where now a generalist can analyze data. Not as good as like someone who does it, but man, AI is pretty damn good at doing so. So that is a whole conversation. Maybe the next coffee we get, we can dive deeper into that. But I
Well,
do
before
want
we
to,
move off of this,
yeah,
okay,
please,
before we do
please.
though, I think that there's something to be said about the idea of like, just knowing that it exists, right? Like if I don't know, we'll just use base one. If I don't know that Facebook exists, I don't even know that that's a platform I can use. Then I don't know how to find a tool to do it better. So I think in the same point of what you're saying and like the generalist idea, it's just being aware that things exist, and then you can learn how to do it if you're curious enough. You can find a tool to help you do it if you're curious enough. You can find someone in your network that knows how to do it if you're curious enough to ask them about it. So I would agree with you in the idea of like it's the person that holds the knowledge of what, and then being able to have the ability to learn the how and moving forward. So it is that like learning the strategy, understanding what the strategy can do, and then being able to figure out how do you actually, or who do you pass it off to, or what tool can you utilize to do the thing. So yeah. Okay. And then now we can
Beautiful.
move.
No, beautiful.
It's like before we
You,
go.
Kaelyn, you took literally my 5 minute rant there and put it into 5 words. So well said, of the kind of the what to the how. I love that. And that curiosity being the underpinning, I think is so important. All right, now I want to take us out of marketing. I know we've been spending a lot of time talking about it. It's been fun, but I want to take us to kind of life, because another realization I've had is some of the best marketers, some of my favorite marketers, they think uniquely about life. They're not doorknobs. They have these unique insights. They're able to kind of think about concepts and topics that are outside of life that then makes them, to your point of philosophy, it just makes them do better marketing because they care more, or they do something that would have never come if they didn't kind of read these books from Leo Tolstoy or whoever it may be. So for you, what is something you do outside of work, outside of comms, marketing, nonprofit world? So for me, it might be meditate, might be take a nap, that when you do this thing that's totally not in the marketing business category, it just has this weird effect that you come back and you do better marketing, you do better business. Does any action, practice, hobby pop into mind for you?
Oh yeah. And again, I hate saying, for anyone that's listening, we keep referencing, talks we've had before, but we've talked about this and we're in agreement on opposite sides of this. But I think it's about learning about myself more. So learning who I am in the world, how I approach the world, what are my, preconceived notions about things, how do I naturally gravitate towards stuff? Why? Like why do I do this? Who am I? And by doing that, you can either find ways to align your marketing it can become more personal. It can become better because you're imbuing who you are and what you truly believe into something. It can also be really negative if you're recognizing that something you're bringing to the table is in direct opposition to the way that something else needs to happen or needs to be said, but still knowing that you might bring that to the table is a way to combat that naturally. So I think being able to understand who I am, being able to understand how I show up in spaces, um, who I gravitate towards, who I might have preconceived notions about, any of those things, I think ultimately makes me better at communicating because I know how I think, the pitfalls I might fall into, and the ways to naturally learn and grow around those things. So for me, that's what it is. And we've talked about personality tests and how I'm like, I love them. I think the more that you have something to base off of, whether, you see this and you read it and you're like, that's not me. And then you're like, but wait, hold on, maybe I do that a little bit. Like you're constantly evaluating how you might be seen in the world, not what you believe yourself to be in the world too. So I think it's positioning. I mean, really, right? When it comes back to it, if you are marketing yourself in some way, you are really understanding your brand positioning and who Kaelyn is and what is that, and is that really what I want my organization to look like? And then in the same way, you can bring that to when you're creating a personality for your organization. Is that really what you want your organization to look like?
I love that. So the activity you talked about personality tests, but it's really anything that gives me more knowledge of self.
Yeah.
That then when I come back, so that could be for someone a walk in nature, could be another person in contemplation, could be another
Yeah.
journaling. But I
Yeah.
love how you stayed high level enough that like just that understanding more of self has this weird paradoxical benefit to the business, whether to your point of all the different ways, whether we're branding our business, branding ourselves. I really like that. And I think it has yet to be brought up on here of like, well, I mean, there's like know thyself or the unexamined life is not worth living. All of these quotes that reinforce what you're saying, but it just
Sure.
like few marketers say that. Like few, and maybe that's because you wouldn't self-describe yourself as a marketer. You're just a
Yeah.
human.
Maybe.
So
Yeah.
that might be the challenge. Oh, I love that. And it's something, yeah, to your point of our conversations, you've really harped on that. And even there's this part, this statement you said of like you think about things, you don't feel them. And that might be a way of someone just feeling stuff to understand, like to your point, how do I show up? And it isn't always like thinking to get there. Sometimes it's like feeling, which was a huge, not breakthrough because I haven't changed at all, but just like this thought of like, yeah, I think a lot about stuff, but I don't feel it all the time. Thank you, Kaelyn, for being my therapist. So one of the other questions I really like to ask is based off a movie. In the movie's called Inception. It's all about these people, group of people who go into the minds of others to incept an idea. It's usually malicious, but we're going to try to focus on a good idea. So I give you the opportunity to go into the minds of every marketer, communicator, designer, someone that looks like you, and you get to incept this idea that tomorrow I wake up and the idea you incept is my idea and I act out of that. So then all of these people are acting. So actually break it past just marketers, communicate, because I don't want it to be a business thing. All humans, what idea would you incept to every single human? So tomorrow we wake up and your idea is my belief and I live out of that.
I like this. So I'm going to use the storytelling of conveying my thought as a marketer, but I think you'll be able to understand how it
I
will go
love it.
outside of that.
Yep, yep.
I wish that people were less scared of talking about the negative things that happen, whether that's in your business or in personal life, out of fear of judgment. And I wish that people would receive those negatives as a way to better something, not as a reason to avoid something. I think that we, just as humans, tend to not want to share the negative thing because it's like then people are going to gang up on us. Then it's going to like be, people are going to like look down on us for this thing that exists and like, oh, we're going to be othered in that way. Or if you're looking at it as an organization, you did something that was an oops and you don't want to tell people that it was an oops. But the best way to build trust is say, we did this thing wrong. This is what we did to fix it or combat it. And this is what we need help doing better in the future. And I wish that in general, we could do that more. And I wish that people stepped up to the plate with more understanding and care. And I wish people could see beyond their individual downfalls in a way that opened themselves up to maybe not being met with that care right away, but knowing that it will be there eventually. I wish that was something that we could do.
It goes back to trust. I really like how you
Trust.
open this podcast with that. And the whole point of talking about those things is it builds trust, even though you're admitting to or you're highlighting a downfall. It builds trust that you didn't ignore it, or maybe you don't even see it. And then I don't know if I trust you because you're just overlooking problems to me that, yeah, that's super powerful. And I can only, the transfer to humans is so potent. Like it's how many people just share like, yeah, I had 2 affairs. Like it's just nobody really talks about that. So like we all have this kind of false belief that like people are perfect or they're kind of just great. And I think it stems from this fear. I would put it a fear of being seen naked, not naked as with no clothes on, but the naked being that you are. You're not some 40 under 40 professional person, like all these things, let them go in that naked self, that like the mistakes, the good things, the positives, like, oh, when I allow another and when I can see another's naked, like that is the deepest level of trust and connection. But it only comes through being vulnerable with those things that I never want to share. Because as Richard Rohr, a far better thinker than me, has said, is you either transmit it or you transform it. And I think you can't transform it until you talk about it, until you put it on the table, as the biblical would be like, what's in the dark kind of grows and what's in the light. Like, it's just so true to me that the more I hold things in, the worse it is. And organizationally, it's the same way, because things will come out. There's like, it's social media today. Someone's going to post about it. Someone's like, you need to own the story. So I love that you brought it out. That is also yet to be talked about on this podcast. So I appreciate you going there. All right. Final question, Kaelyn, because we could, and I'm going to say it like 7 times, we could talk forever. Final question. With everything changing, AI, all of these things, the political, all of these things changing or just kind of mayhem, what do you hope in 5, 10, 15 years stays the same that we still have? And maybe it left today, but maybe we had it 5 years ago. What do you hope is still here in 2040?
I think something that has ebbed and flowed due to COVID and restrictions in that way is physical spaces for people to show up and to be together. I think that that's still happening. It's definitely coming back. We have a lot of, networking groups and all of these things, but I feel like there is a natural draw to like, oh, we could just host that meeting online. Then more people can come. It's more accessible, which is true in some ways. And I think it's cool to be able to understand different people's abilities to get places and all of that stuff that goes into it. But I really hope that we can continue to have emphasis on physical gathering and the magic that can happen when people are physically in a space together, and the feelings that you get that you never feel when you're online with someone. Even in the sense of like, I recently got married, but last summer we went to the courthouse and got married just in front of our parents, and then this summer we had the celebration, and it was so important to us to have that celebration because you could physically feel the support that was there, and that I really hope that we don't lose that. And maybe that's too short of a time frame to like be too scared of it going away, but I really hope that physical spaces can continue for us to continue to gather and to be human together.
I love your example. And you could even take that marriage example to the extreme, is even if you got married in person, but there's tons of laptops with people's heads on the screens, wouldn't
Right?
feel the same, right? Like it just
No.
wouldn't hit. This, I love that. That's a
Yeah.
perfect example. And I think regardless of COVID, I mean, you have so much online communities now, like all of these things that people can go deep into, and there's clearly positives. You can connect around another person who loves this unique game, or and they live in a whole different country or whole different city. I totally get that. But there's just something about like the studies that just show like there's a pro to getting together with people in person. And I know even like, again, I use the Bible a lot, but it's like 2-3 people come together. I mean, obviously virtual Zooms weren't there back in the, time of Jesus, but I don't think he would have put it of like 2 and 3 meet over Zoom and I'm there. It's like, there's something about that physical, just being together. You get to see everything, like whether it's a body language or just like all of the aspects of the person. So that's a great one. I
Well, and
appreciate
even
you. Go ahead.
you're kind of talking about like, I mean, because even if you start online, right? Let's say it's a game, right? You're very excited about, this game that you all really like together. Eventually, someone's going to be like, so we should all meet up, right? Like there, I would guess very few times that you're like, we're
I'd
just
rather.
never gonna take this IRL. You know what I mean? Like we're never, you're online dating, but we're never gonna have a in real life
Yeah.
date. Like everyone eventually ends up there because I think innately we as humans want to gather. We want to be in physical spaces together. We want to have those tactile moments of being able to experience the same thing at the same time in the same space. So yeah, I really liked that idea, right? It's cool to have digital, but we'll always come back to being together physically.
Well said. And that wraps up this episode. Thank you so much,
Awesome.
Kaelyn, for coming on
Thank
and
you.
sharing. And I hope we can soon get together in a space and have a conversation, a coffee, a cup of tea or something.
Would love that. Yeah. Thank you so much for inviting me. It was a pleasure and an honor. So thank you.
Thank you. And this is the end of the podcast. Thank you so much for making it this far. I am grateful that you're here. I have some good news and I got some bad news. Bad news, season 3 is coming to an end. There's only a few more episodes left. So what's the good news? A new season, Friends of the Show, a whole new show, is debuting in November. What this show is I'm bringing back old guests, friends of the show, back on to talk about life, talk about marketing, talk about anything to catch up and see how are you doing, where are you at, and helps you as a listener connect deeper with the guests who have been on the show and helps me continually develop a relationship, a friendship with many of these great humans that I've interviewed. And double good news, my wife and I are having our baby in November. So while I will be MIA for a bit, the season of Friends of the Show will run every other week or every week. I don't want to give you a for sure yet, but just know that we're just starting. This is only the beginning. Thank you for being here, and I cannot wait to see what we accomplish, what we uncover, and how we all can get better at marketing. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. I hope to see you back next time.